Arizona's 2nd Congressional District.
I'm running to be in a co-equal branch of the government.
One of the reasons I'm running is to really point out where I think she diverges.
And the race for the U.S. Senate.
What can I do to help Arizona through what is arguably some very difficult challenges?
What my vision is for Arizona and what I can do for Arizona that's not being done now.
Plus, early ballots in the hands of voters. This is Arizona Week. Hello, and thanks for joining us. Arizona's 2nd Congressional District is considered one of the races to watch. The district covers much of southern Arizona. Republican incumbent Martha McSally, a retired Air Force colonel, won the seat by a narrow margin 2 years ago. This time, she's being challenged by Democrat Matt Heinz, a physician and former state lawmaker. On today's program, you'll hear from both. First is Representative Martha McSally.
Do you think a bigger, better wall will address the problems you hear about in the district?
Well, I'm on the Homeland Security Committee, and this spring I was given this amazing opportunity to become the chairwoman of the Border and Maritime Security Subcommittee. Never been given to an Arizona member before, never a freshman. And in that role, we've been highlighting what's not working in border security for communities like ours. We've had 6 hearings to include one in the district. We've actually brought border residents to Washington, D.C. to testify at our hearings, and we need a better strategy. Right now, they admitted that they have about real-time situational awareness of about 56% of the 2,000-mile southern border.
What does that mean?
That means that, like, if something moves in that other 44%, they don't have real-time information that it's coming over the border. So I've been really pushing them in this role to provide intelligence-driven operations, to detect the activities as close as possible south of the border, to move the strategy to be more focused at the border, because when the activity is coming 100, 150 miles inland, that's impacting public safety threats to our community, and that's what we've heard in these different hearings. I have 2 pieces of legislation of my 9 that have passed through the House that are specifically related to border security. One is providing better accountability of their technology programs. They've wasted a lot of taxpayers' money in the past. And the second is directing a full threat assessment of the southern border, the 2,000 miles. What percentage has situational awareness? What percentage has operational control? So that we can come up with a better strategy. So it needs to include those intelligence-driven ops, airborne assets, sensors, and using manpower appropriately, a foot patrol, horse patrol, ATVs, helicopters, if needed, in order to intercept these transnational criminal organizations and the spotters that they're using on our hilltops in order to keep our country and community safe. And that's really been my focus in this leadership role that I've been given.
The Affordable Care Act. Yeah. People across the political spectrum are calling for changes.
Yes.
Many different scope of changes. Your opponent is a doctor. How do you compete with his expertise on that topic?
Well, I've spent tireless amount of time talking to thought leaders in the community, whether it's hospitals, doctors, nurses, those that are involved in this very complex issue. And look, the Affordable Care Act is collapsing under its own weight. 14 of the 15 counties in Arizona only have 1 remaining provider in the marketplace, and 1 county has 2. Pinal County had none for a while until they brought somebody else in. People are getting cancellations this week, and premiums are going up 47, 51%. We've worked some bipartisan changes in order to stop the medical device tax, the hospital insurance tax, Cadillac tax. My 9th bill that just got passed through the House actually is stopping a tax increase on seniors that is looming. That's part of the Affordable Care Act. Look, we can agree that we need people with pre-existing conditions to be able to get health care coverage. We need people to be able to get health care access, especially those that are in poverty. But there are better ways to do this than the Affordable Care Act, which is a one-size-fits-all, top-down, government-run solution that is taking choices and away from people and increasing costs. And my opponent actually was a PR person advocating for this and thinks it should go even further. That's not what Southern Arizona residents believe, and so I'm going to represent them better.
Gender, that's been an issue in the national campaign. You recently started a women's youth leadership and also women in the workplace initiatives. Why start those this year? What prompted that?
Well, as you know, I mean, I've been fighting for women's equal opportunity my whole life. I've seen it myself. I've had to break through barriers in the military, been fighting against discrimination. It's been my personal journey. On the Young Women's Leadership Mentorship Program, that's a role that I can have in our community to be able to provide mentorship opportunities from amazing women in our community to young high school girls. And this is something we're going to continue to build on every single year because, you know, we've seen that if women and girls can get access to role models and mentorship and support along the way, they can meet their full potential. So I'll keep doing that in our community. That doesn't take an act of Congress to do. It's just a role of being a leader. I kicked off a working group on women in the 21st century workforce because I feel like we've come a long way, but we have so many challenges and barriers. And what we have are a lot of really tired women that are trying to meet their full economic potential, but they're still culturally and because of their individual circumstances, often single parents, the sole provider for their children, taking on primary responsibilities to be caregivers of children and parents. And we have to take a hard look at what those remaining barriers and challenges are and find solutions that are actually going to work for women. And I'm leading that effort.
So does that mean congressional solutions or others?
Potentially. We've had a hearing in Washington, D.C. I've been on sort of listening sessions. We're actually having a hearing in the district. And we're in the phase of trying to identify right now all the challenges and barriers. And then when we identify solutions, not everything should take an act of Congress necessarily. But we do have some outdated labor laws that what we've been hearing from people in this journey so far potentially are actually tying the hands and creating barriers for women that maybe we need to take a fresh look and update some of those rules for the 21st century.
I have to ask you about Donald Trump. He said recently to a group of veterans that strong veterans do not get post-traumatic stress disorder, and that angered a lot of veterans. Are you supporting your party's nominee for president?
Look, our veterans go and serve our country, go into harm's way, and this is those that are still with us from World War II through Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq and Afghanistan. And some come back with the physical wounds of war, and some come back with the emotional wounds of war. They have seen horrific things, they have fought for us, and we have a covenant with them. But we've got to take care of all of those wounds, whether they're internal or external, and provide the care and the support that they need to continue to contribute to our society. Definitely been a focus of mine. When it comes to the presidential race, I've never endorsed a politician in my life, and I'm not starting now. I'm running to be in a co-equal branch of the government to continue to represent 700,000 people that I've been tirelessly fighting for since I've been in D.C. I've been able to get 9 bills passed through the House, 2 signed into law, and also big wins on the long-term transportation bill, keeping the A-10 flying, and I've showed those results. So my focus when I get up in the morning every single day is to serve Southern Arizona and now make the case as to why I should be able to continue to serve. And I hope I'm given that opportunity.
Representative Martha McSally, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Congressional District 2 was traditionally Republican. In recent years, though, it's nearly evenly split with Democrats and Republicans. A third of voters, though, are registered as independents. Here's Democrat Matt Heinz. We begin with his thoughts on border security.
You know, I look at the border and not just in a vacuum. You have to look at everything kind of together. You look at, of course, security, because, of course, one of the primary things we have to do as elected leaders is to make sure that we defend the nation's borders. And so is that Border Patrol? Sure. Is that augmenting the Border Patrol with technology that will help them do their jobs? Yes. But it's also looking at the whole immigration picture and looking at the 11 to 12 million people who are aspiring to be American citizens who want to pay taxes and working on a way to bring them into the fold. They are at this time law-abiding, and a lot of our own families came from other places. I know mine did, and that's really what we need to do, I think. But then you can't really lose sight of the border economy, because Southern Arizona especially, the state overall, we have over a 250,000 of our jobs directly dependent upon trade with Sonora, Mexico, not California and not Texas or New Mexico. So we actually need to work on hiring more agents at the border, not for the Border Patrol, but also for Customs, to make sure that we have the free flow of goods and trade north and south across the border to allow for the creation of more jobs right here.
You are a physician. How has the Affordable Care Act changed your job at all?
Well, you know, one of the things I noticed during my training was that so many, nearly a fifth of my patients, had no way to access primary care, preventive care, and they ended up in the ER with, you know, undiagnosed diabetes, severe infections, and all these complications that are very costly and sometimes led to the loss of life or limb. And what I found was that the Affordable Care Act, while of course has problems we need to fix, it has allowed for millions of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Arizonans, many right here in Southern Arizona, to get access to a doctor or a nurse practitioner for the first time ever. And so they get diagnosed with early onset diabetes, and they can prevent it from going forward. They can prevent those infections. They can detect a small polyp or tumor in the colon wall and get it removed before it goes throughout the body, and they succumb to that. And that's really, it costs so much less for our healthcare system to detect these things early, breast cancer, heart disease, cholesterol issues. And that's what the Affordable Care Act has done for so many people. Also, I think a lot of folks don't know that other than getting uninsured people some kind of insurance, for folks on Medicare, for our Medicare seniors, they have had a significant benefit in terms of additional annual wellness checks for no additional cost. And also their prescription drug prices have been brought much, much lower thanks to the Affordable Care Act too.
Your opponent is a decorated military veteran, but you yourself did your residency in a veterans hospital.
That's right.
How do you see that experience sort of shaping your ideas when it comes to standing up for veterans?
You know, and I absolutely honor and her service, and we all appreciate that. While I'm not, I did have the great privilege and the honor of serving our veterans in a different capacity, and that is as their physician for a number of years, for 3 years at our VA here. And there's really no greater honor than tending to the needs of our heroes, you know, at the time that they need it. And so that's something that I really cherished those years, and all of the wonderful stories I heard as I treated my patients from the World War II veterans. Most, unfortunately, are no longer with us, but this was about 10 years ago, so I still carry with me a lot of those inspiring stories of their heroism, and really it was it's such a priority, not just all of our patients, but especially to make sure that those who have sacrificed and lost limb, that they have what they need, and that the VA is able to provide those services, especially while actually the number's 20 veterans a day due to PTSD, depression, and other behavioral health issues are unfortunately taking their own lives. And as long as that number is more than one, we have to work really hard to make sure that we can address it.
Congressional District 2 is widely considered a race to watch. And now we hear that Arizona is considered a battleground state. No longer,
right, it is.
No longer really a Republican stronghold. So where do you see your opportunity when we talk about the Democratic ticket all the way down that ballot?
Look, this is again a really unique election year. We have the top of the ticket, Donald Trump, who came out swinging at Latinos. Right, that's one of the first things he said. He made this election almost a referendum on like how the country is going to look moving forward. And I don't really appreciate his words, and I don't think that Southern Arizonans appreciate the xenophobia and the bigotry that he's really injected into this campaign, when all of us, as we were saying, come from somewhere else.
What has been your take on Hillary Clinton's comments regarding deplorables and those who support Donald Trump?
I hesitate. I certainly don't like generalizing in that way, and I think that you heard her apologize and walk that back, and I appreciate that she did that. It's really important when when you're elected, when you're in the leadership role. We're human, and we're going to sometimes say things that we don't mean or that get taken the wrong way, and there's a natural response to hide from that. You can't do that.
Moving now to the race for U.S. Senate, longtime Republican Senator John McCain is being challenged by Congressional Representative Ann Kirkpatrick, and the presidential race is casting a big shadow over the contest. The names Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were front and center for the only debate between Senator McCain and Representative Kirkpatrick. Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover reports.
Accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
Senator McCain supported Donald Trump from the time he was nominated last summer, although McCain was critical of some of the Republican presidential candidate's statements. On Saturday, Senator McCain withdrew his support after release of the video in which Mr. Trump made vulgar comments about women.
All of those things I thought were very wrong. But then, when Mr. Trump attacks women and demeans the women in our nation and in our society, that is a point where I just have to part company. It's not pleasant for me to renounce the nominee of my party. He won the nomination fair and square.
Senator McCain's early support for Mr. Trump and now his reversal have had his opponent, Congresswoman Ann Kirkpatrick, on the attack during much of the campaign, and it showed up in their only debate.
And so, Senator, I just want to ask you, do you trust Donald Trump's finger on the nuclear arsenal? Yes or no?
Isn't that kind of a nonsense question? I've said I don't support him. So why would I?
Do you
it's
trust?
A nonsense.
Do you trust his finger on the button?
I do not see a scenario where the finger would be on the button. Do you support Hillary Clinton's finger on the nuclear button?
I
You
do.
Okay, but no, I don't.
That was a continuation of the sparring characteristic of the campaign since its beginning. That includes Senator McCain's jabs at Congresswoman Kirkpatrick for her support of Hillary Clinton and her defense of the Democratic nominee, which the Congresswoman stuck to in the debate.
I think she's the most experienced, knowledgeable candidate we've had for president in years. But I don't agree with everything in her policies. For instance, I've been fighting against the EPA for our coal-fire electrical plants.
Senator McCain has 100% name recognition in Arizona, while Congresswoman Kirkpatrick represents a district that covers all or parts of 11 Arizona counties. The incumbent has called it the most difficult race of his political career.
Representative Kirkpatrick is a former county prosecutor and state legislator. She says it's time for someone else to represent Arizona.
We've got to pass comprehensive immigration reform that includes the DREAM Act. We think we could do it now in Congress if leadership would just allow us to vote. We think we've got enough Republicans who have common sense and realize that we need to get this done, but they won't even let us vote on it. They won't bring it up for a vote, but it has to be done.
Aside from immigration, economy is part of the border.
Yeah, and especially down here. I mean, Davis-Monthan is such a big part of the economic engine, and we've got to think long-term. I know there's a new commander there, and so, we're thinking of what's the long-term picture for Davis-Monthan and keeping the base open. But, it's also about education. So I'm a wildcat here today at my alma mater, but we've got to build a world-class education system in Arizona so that we can fill those good-paying 21st century jobs.
What sorts of things will you tell people that you can do as a senator? Because oftentimes we hear they get elected, they make these promises, and then we never hear from them again.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I have 7 offices in Arizona, so I want to be very accessible as a senator to Arizonans so that they know I'm in their community constantly and I can hear from them. But it's all about building a strong, diverse, stable economy in Arizona. I grew up in a small timber town up in the White Mountains. And when I was a kid, everybody had jobs. It was a thriving middle class. When we saw that industry collapse, that area, my hometown of White River, plunged into poverty. All the problems associated with poverty: crime, violence, hunger. And so I see Arizona has gone through many boom and bust cycles, but for the future, we need to stabilize our economy. Small business is a big piece of that, but we've got to have a world-class education system to attract the kind of 21st century businesses we want in Arizona and to fill those jobs.
For people right now, this day and age, safety and security is a very real concern. When we talk about foreign policy and John McCain's experience in the Senate, where do you stand? How can you encourage the voters to believe that you have just as much knowledge of these issues?
Yeah, we have to destroy ISIS. We have to track down terrorists and kill them. And it's a two-pronged approach. We have to cut their supply lines, and then we have to keep them from exporting terror. So the big concern is that they're going to export terror to our country. And you're right, it's all about keeping our country, our people safe.
You mentioned the youth and Latino vote, 2 big demographics in Arizona, particularly the Latino vote. We hear the ads, we hear the campaigning, and traditionally some of the issues can be divisive. So where do you stand?
Well, I support the DREAM Act for starters, and do a lot of millennial Latino roundtables. I just want to hear from them. So I'm out all over Arizona. I want to hear from people, and I hear from so many working families who value education, but they're struggling to put their children through school. Yesterday, did a veterans roundtable here. These veterans have already served our country. They've paid the price, but they're still struggling to get the benefits. And I hear from a lot of seniors. They've worked their entire life, and they're really worried about whether they're going to continue to get Social Security and Medicare.
If elected, you could be the first female to serve as Senator of Arizona.
That's right.
Do you think about that?
Not too much. Not too much. I really think about what my vision is for Arizona and what I can do for Arizona that's not being done now. So my two committees I think are really important to Arizona. I'm on the Agriculture Committee and also Transportation and Infrastructure. So one of the visions is to have Arizona become a major transportation corridor. I've been working with Congressman Gosar on the I-11 designation, and we just were able to get language in the Authorization Act to make sure that that I-11 corridor starts at the Mexican border. But it's also about border security. Look, I'm a former prosecutor. I have zero tolerance for the criminal, the cartels, the drug smuggling, the human traffic smuggling that's going on. Again, we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform so the Border Patrol can concentrate on the criminals.
John McCain has served in the Senate for nearly 30 years. He's seeking election to his 6th term. Over the last 3 weeks, we've tried to sit down with Senator McCain, but we're unable to. Arizona Public Media's Andrea Kelly last spoke with Senator McCain in August. Here's a portion of that interview.
One is national security. The nation is under attack, and according to the Director of National Intelligence and the head of the CIA, there will be further attacks on the United States of America. First time since December 7th, 1941, except for, of course, 9/11. And the other is our environment, fire and water. Fire and water are the challenges for Arizona, for our children and our grandchildren. 20% of our national forests have been burned by fire in the last 10 years. Our water, we're running out of water, and we have an enormous challenge if we're going to have an adequate water supply and national forests that exist.
Let's move on to immigration. You've helped support and introduce some comprehensive immigration bills in the past. In 2013, it passed the Senate but died in the House. So where do you stand now? And I'm going to go back to Trump again on his proposal for a wall.
What works is sufficient border patrol, sufficient surveillance, sufficient interior enforcement as well. We have made significant improvements in border security, particularly in the construction of towers that can see many sections of our border. If you've ever, I'm sure that some people have visited China or read about China. The Chinese built a Great Wall at one point. That didn't work either. And we have to do a number of other things. One of them is, of course, is E-Verify. That means that anyone who applies for a job has got to have a document that proves they're in this country legally. If a person hires someone that doesn't have that document, then that employer has to be prosecuted. Second of all, let's not ignore one fundamental fact. 40% of the people who are in this country illegally didn't come across our border. They came on a visa, and the visa expired. That's why this E-Verify program is so very important. Finally, could I mention, there is a new real serious problem, and that is this manufactured heroin that is manufactured in Mexico that is flooding the Northeast and the Midwest to the point where various governors have said it's an epidemic, and it is killing a whole lot of people. It's easy to smuggle because it's not like marijuana in big bales. So we're going to have to look at that problem and issue. And it isn't just border enforcement. It is also the fact that there's a demand for it. And Economics 101 show that if there's a demand for a product, there will be a supply sooner or later. So we've got a real education issue about this manufactured heroin.
Are you working on, or if reelected, do you have any plans for a comprehensive immigration reform part 2? Or attempt 2?
One of the more interesting facts proving the old adage that life isn't fair, in 2009, Barack Obama had 60 votes in the United States Senate, overwhelming majority in the House of Representatives. And what did he do? He took up Obamacare, stimulus package, Dodd-Frank. Never once did he propose comprehensive immigration reform, which he could have done, as he did with those other pieces of legislation, without any Republican votes. Sooner or later, we will address the issue of 11 million people in this country that are not in a legal status. We will have to address it one way or the other. I'm hoping that we can have a secure border, a path to citizenship that means fines, that means background checks, it means back taxes, it means getting behind everybody else, a very tough path to citizenship. We are going to have to do that sooner or later. But we also have to have a secure border because the American people have to have the confidence that, unlike when Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 6 million people, that there just won't be a renewed number of people who come illegally.
And wrapping up our political coverage, The Buzz with Christopher Conover. Christopher, early ballots have just been mailed out.
Early ballots are out. 1.5 million have been mailed out statewide, and voters in Arizona have until the 28th of October to request an early ballot, so we could get more before that date and probably will get more.
What are some of the numbers looking like, because we have new voters this time around?
We do have new voters. The Secretary of State's office has released some preliminary numbers. 120,000 new registered voters as of the early part of this week. What's interesting is that brings the total number of active voters to about 3.5 million, but there are 500,000 or so inactive voters in Arizona. That means those are people who are registered, but they haven't voted in a while. We don't know whether or not they'll go to the polls. We could potentially have 4 million people go to the polls in a little more than 3 weeks.
And just to be clear, this does not affect the Electoral College numbers.
No, it does not. The Electoral College numbers are based on population. And as people get their early ballots, as many people have this week, they'll see under the candidates' names for president, there's a list of names. Politically active people may recognize some of them, who the electors are. For example, the Democrats, Gabrielle Giffords is an elector for the Democrats. On the Republican side, Bruce Ashe, who's a national Republican party man, is one of the electors.
And we don't have any demographics about these new voters, correct? Are they youth? Are they Latino? Which is what we've seen some of the candidates really trying to reach those groups.
We really don't have any demographics. When it comes to demographics and voting in Arizona, we don't ask a lot of questions. For example, we know from the census 30 to 33% of Arizona's population is Latino, but we don't know how many of them are registered voters. We don't ask. Now, you could look at last names and make some guesses, but that's not always the safest thing to do.
Okay, Christopher Conover, thank you. And that's our program. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us.